Hey, Cut the Shit listeners. You can find every episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Go check us out. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I'm very excited to have Wayne Easterwood as our guest. Wayne is a principal at Work Heartily, a Nashville-based fractional executive leadership company. Prior to getting into the fractional CIO business, Wayne spent a multi-decade career in traditional IT operational and leadership roles, with his last stop as a C-level executive for a multi-site clinical healthcare provider. During our conversation, Wayne shares the fundamentals of what fractional execs do and don't do, where the work fits in between interim execs and project-based consultants, and what he's found that leads to success from the engagements he's been involved with. Wayne's energy and passion for the work he's doing really comes through in our discussion, and it makes me think I need to spend more time digging in and better understanding the impact that fractional executives are having with our clients. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Wayne Easterwood. Wayne, welcome to Cut the Shit. How you doing this afternoon?
I am well. Thanks, Bryan.
I'm glad to have you on. Our paths crossed when you were over at Tennessee Orthopedic Associates or Alliance Associates?
Right.
Alliance, yeah.
Alliance.
Don't want to mess that up. I like the folks over there. Don't want to mess up their name. It's been a bit since we've talked, though, so I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. All right, well, let's get to the main event. To get us started, how about you give us just a quick thumbnail sketch of you and your background and a little bit of the origin story maybe for the organization you're with today.
You bet. So my name is Wayne Easterwood, and I'm a partner with Work Heartily. And we are a small organization working with Jonathan, the founding partner, for about 4 years. I come out of a lot of healthcare background, a CIO, and in my last position was the chief administrative officer. So really leading technology in the healthcare space. Started a long time ago in the music business. And that may seem strange, but from my very first job as technology was just starting to be introduced into business, I found this energy when technology could begin to lift work off of people. And that I look back on that and I see where I went and what really I gravitated to, and that was a nugget. So I've always had that. So as electronic health records entered and the excitement of how that was going to change the way people work, that has been a theme through all my life. So yeah, so now working in a similar kind of role, just not as a W-2 employee, I guess.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Not that your story is that unique in Nashville. A lot of people start in the music business and migrate to other things. But I'm not sure you knew this, but one of our founding partners, Cameron Plato, also started in the music business and made his way into IT, and mostly on the healthcare side. He didn't work at a healthcare company, but did a lot of business with the healthcare industry in Nashville. So, I won't say it's a well-trodden path, but there's more than one of you out there for sure. So, well, cool. Well, tell us a little bit about Work Heartily and give us kind of what it is, what you guys do, and sort of what problems you're trying to solve.
You bet. So we are a group of colleagues that offer fractional executive services, executive leadership. And by fractional, I mean, that is a professional who offers their leadership skills or expertise and to multiple organizations, either on a part-time or an interim or maybe a contract basis. So rather than a full-time employed at one entity, we offer engagements, less than full-time. And we're executives with executive experience trying to fill a need where there is need for capacity and capability in organizations usually that are growing.
Right. So that I figured the growth, I figured we'd get to that in terms of talking about growing. Yeah. But before we get to sort of today, let's take a step back. And when was the first time you were exposed to this idea of fractional leadership, right? Because that's not a phrase that I heard until fairly late in my career,
Yeah.
even though I think the concept has been out there for a while. So talk to me about, or talk to us about sort of that, your exposure to the idea and how you got interested in it as a concept that might apply to
Sure.
you or that might make sense for you.
So it probably comes from a couple of ends. I talked to lots of leaders. I talked to lots of companies that either, they had an executive that was wearing lots of hats, or they had an executive that was carrying something that was outside of really their expertise for too long. And it was creating tension. So in the probably the best example of this has been in the financial world for a long time. You've got companies that they know they need a CFO expertise. That, man, they don't need more than about 5-10 hours a week, or maybe 40 plus hours a month, but they need somebody to manage treasury or new money or something strategy around their finances, in addition to maybe their accountant or their controller, which is really the day-to-day. Technology, I saw, was happening, was the same thing was happening. It needed some more expertise, but many companies didn't need. They'd be looking for a full-time person, for more things for them to do.
Right. They'd want that plus all these day-to-day kinds of things, right?
So my colleagues, even though I was a part of a fairly large organization, I would talk to people that sort of had this struggle. Either they couldn't afford or they couldn't find the level of experience they needed. Plus, it's difficult to wear the tactical delivery hat and the technology strategy hat at the same time. And we can talk about a little bit more about that, but I heard about and saw this tension. And when Jonathan and I began to talk, I discovered we had sort of a resonant kind of feeling that there was an opportunity in business for that.
So how did you meet Jonathan? Give us the story on how you guys got together. Had you guys worked
Sure.
previously together, or was it? Tell us about that.
He was actually a vendor in his previous company, staffing as a mission.
Okay.
I used him for some staffing delivery. So as I was making my exit out of Centerstone, I began to talk to him about ideas and thoughts as I began to network and figure out what I was going to do next. And that's when we found out we had kind of a similar kind of resonance. So he and I were colleagues, or not colleagues, but excuse me, he was a vendor.
Right.
I was a customer of his previous business.
Interesting. That's sort of how I got exposed to the guys at Plow,
Yeah.
in a similar fashion. I mean, one of the founders, Bryan Law, is an old friend of mine, so I'd known Bryan forever. But in terms of working relationship, they were one of my core vendors when I was on the company side. So I understand, that's a great way actually to get to know someone and to get a lot of exposure to how they work, right? Especially we were dealing with some fairly difficult, it was a difficult situation, so we worked really closely together, which was really helpful in seeing what they were all about. And I'd say they'd probably say the same, in the other direction, seeing what I was all about. So it sounds like maybe you guys had something similar.
Yeah, and the baseball reference really kind of gave it a little bit away.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
But indeed, that was very much we liked each other from that business relationship standpoint. So it was a great chance to explore this opportunity to work together.
And you mentioned and you have some other folks on the team. Have you guys?
Yeah.
Do you sort of provide sort of a group of fractional executives? How do you guys structure the business?
We do. So I would say we've got we've got different practices or different leanings. We've got a couple of guys that are sort of operating folks, chief operating officers. We've got actually a couple of guys that do more of a branding, marketing, pointed product, and then certainly have some relationships with analytics, really high-end analytics, as well as some software development folks.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so a few people in the stable there.
Okay, so let's transition a little bit to the client base and sort of who you guys are serving. You mentioned growth as one of the precipitating factors, maybe, or growth causes all kinds of we tend to think of it as this unalloyed good, right? And it's not, right? It
Right.
causes all kinds of problems, right? It's better, I guess, in the alternative, which is decline, but nevertheless, it creates challenges for you as a company. So you mentioned that as most of the companies you guys work with are in some sort
Right.
of growth phase. But talk to us a little bit about the range of companies that you find yourself dealing with. Is it all over the place? Are there some similarities around size and complexity and maturity? What does that sort of profile range look like?
Sure. So maybe a word that we can hang this on is tension. Change creates tension. And so there's a lot of reasons that the tension will be created. Some is growth. Some might be merging. Some might be taking on money, funding, and having to prepare to scale. So, so we find a resonant with founder-led organizations as they begin to, as they begin beyond the incubation and they really begin to grow. They find that they need some more specific expertise. And so, how and when do I go get that expertise? The most previous engagement that you referenced, that was an organization that was preparing to merge
Right.
some operations. So, they needed a different kind of skill set in the future than they maybe did today. And they certainly needed a different skill set to take them from today to that place. So it's usually transition, change, tension that are words that hang in that. Now, what are the sizes? It might be 2 million, it might be 50 million. Okay. But it's usually some organization that is going through change and needs some expertise to carry them through that change. And I think those are the ideal engagements we look for.
Makes sense. And I would assume, if you've got, to your point, professional money involved, either early stage or at sort of a private equity level or something like
Right.
that, right? I would imagine there's often a push to say you guys need some help here, right? You can't do it all, and that's okay, because I think that's oftentimes a struggle, to your point, with founder-led organizations.
Right. And they carried it this far. It's difficult for them to say, "Oh, I need to let that go," because it's big dollars for them to hire particular expertise, or it's risk.
Right.
It says, well, it's
control,
the latest
loss
point
of
that
control. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. So, what we offer is a chance in that fractional kind of role, is a chance for them to buy earlier for a reasonable amount, and someone that's got some experience that they can afford to take them through.
Right. Because to your point, if it's binary, if it's I need a full-time CIO or a full-time chief operating officer or nothing, you're going to get nothing a lot of times, right? You're going to get Joe, the VP of IT, who's supposed to play CIO 2 days a week, right? And he doesn't have the background and he's got too many other things. He's trying to figure out why the network keeps going down. He doesn't have time to figure out some sort of longer term, strategy around, multi-operational, resilience or something. I don't know, I'm making stuff up, but I mean, it sounds like that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
Right. I think it is. And maybe we could talk about, there's the interim kind of position, there's the fractional position, and then there's maybe a consultant position. The interim is full-time, the fractional is part-time, and the consultant is more hourly or project-based.
Right.
So those terms, that's maybe a way to begin to hang some definition on that. The interim is a short-term. The fractional is probably long-term, but could be short-term. And the consultant's short-term.
Right.
So,
and I'd assume the interim is most often filling a seat that was filled by somebody else previously, right?
Correct.
And you're very often, I would assume, the first CIO at a company if you're coming in as a fractional.
Right. It would not be, and here's another kind of a typical use case. You've got an organization that needs to grow from here to here. They got goals to go to, they're at 5 million and want to go to 20.
Right.
Okay. So the person they need when they get to 20 is probably a really different person than they need today. They need somebody with energy to really drive the change to get them there. And they probably would struggle to write the job description for what 20 is. They need someone to help them get there and help them develop the job profile of that person that is the longer term. And they probably need a different personality type of sorts,
Right.
Someone who's got energy to drive change versus someone that's got energy to go the long haul.
Right, right. And then the management role is different at that. We're using 5 and 20. They're placeholders, right?
But it's placeholders.
It's a different role. It's a different kind of job, right? Even though the title might be the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe the other thing you touched on this distinction, the person that just loves to drive towards stability. You got a tactical person that wakes up every day and they want to keep the network up. They want to fix it when it breaks. They want to hear the problems that people have and they want to solve them. It is their life and their energy. And that person is so valuable in the organization. But the conversations that leaders are having often have the implication of messing all that up. They want to grow. They want to change. They want to improve. It is a mental shift for that tactical person to go sit in that. Now that may be their career aspirations, but that's a conscious thing. And oftentimes it's difficult to sit in both of those worlds and help the organization grow. And that's the space that we love to be in.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because you got to have those people, but they're not necessarily the ones that are going to get you, that most often are not going to be the ones that are going to get you that big step change in growth. Right.
Yeah.
Because it's going to mess up the plan. Right?
Yeah. But it's hard to wear both of those hats.
Yeah.
It really is difficult to wear both of those hats. Yeah.
For sure. Let's transition a little bit. I want to we've talked about sort of the what, kind of what you do. Now I want to talk about sort of how and what makes for a successful engagement by looking at both some success factors and maybe some not so successful examples of as well, things where maybe you guys struggled a little, because I'm thinking about the audience. They may find themselves in a situation where they need some fractional help, or they may be in an organization that brings in fractional help. And so understanding how you guys think and who are these creatures roaming around in their company twice a week that all of a sudden have all this power, quote unquote. How do I deal with these folks? So maybe give us some context on, maybe generalize and then drill down on a couple of examples of engagements that have gone really well. And then now that we're sort of post facto, what were the factors as you can see them that went into making those so successful?
Well, engagements that went really well are when the leadership understands their need and understands the things they need to let go of and trust. So, engagements that as I think of those that have gone well are when the leaders understand what they're getting, okay, and lean on that. We have a mantra. We say we'd like to have embedded ownership, okay? So even though I may be, this is sort of the break from the consultant, okay? I'm not there in an advisory standpoint. I'm there in an ownership standpoint. I'm on the team. I say I'll own it. So I would expect the owner to, or the leader, the CXO, to call me, to send me and know that I'm going to carry it out and I'm going to make it happen. I own it. So that's the thing, when they can let that go. Oftentimes you've got leaders that have been very accustomed to being all up in anything. And so it's difficult to get, to stop game tackling things. Because it's something they've grown and they care deeply about. Building the trust by being an embedded ownership, I think, is when those are the times that the engagements go well. And it goes tough. It is a tougher thing when that transition doesn't happen.
Right. So that's that's sort of that's a success factor or sort of critical success component to engaging with leadership. What about at the other side of the equation? What about with the troops, so to speak? What have you seen in terms of being successful, engaging those who aren't on the leadership team?
You gotta build the trust in them, and they have to know that you're there for their success. Because the first a common perception is, why is this person here?
That's what I figured. Yeah.
How can they ever be committed to our organization as committed as I am? And are they here to eliminate my job, take my job, whatever? So it is it is for them to understand that you're here for their success. That's a, and that takes some relationship. That takes some relationship building.
Right.
We are probably fortunate that we began this in the pandemic and post-pandemic age, where it's not uncommon for us to be working via Zoom,
Sure.
and we're not, in physical facilities very often. We had to be purposeful about that. So it's different. It's the same need, building trust, building relationship, actually understanding and let them know that you're going to bat for them, okay? And they can trust you, but that you're also for them and for the organization.
Yeah, you mentioned it's just as a sidebar. It's really interesting how quickly, I mean, whenever, not everyone, obviously, but those that could worked from home, right? During that stretch, right? And it really changed the culture of business as far as I can tell, almost immediately, right? The idea of having to be in the office for one thing, or if you are at home, you need to pretend like you're not at home, because that was sort of that was sort of the idea. I mean, you can go back and look, and like even in the late 2017, 2018, 2019, there was a lot of people who were working from home 1 day a week or 2 days a week.
Right.
But that was to do mostly individual contributor work, not to actually do any collaboration work. And
Right.
If you did collaboration, you were kind of supposed to set things up and pretend like you weren't at home, because if you were at home, you weren't really at work.
You weren't really.
I mean, we still had a very binary idea. And look, there's some real benefits to having a separation between work and home, as I think we all learned during that time. But like, I can remember clearly having conversations with people and like kids running by or dogs, and it being totally fine, after 2020. And that not being true just a year or two before. And I thought that was a good thing. Like you got to know people. I was able to ask people questions and say, hey, tell me about your dog or about your kid, or, kind of things that you wouldn't have before. They would have apologized for that or tried to protect the engagement from. That's a sidebar. But that does create, yes. But building relationships through this is a challenge. It's not the same. So I guess you guys have to deal with that on the regular.
We do. And I've got my own framework and sort of language and glossary that I like to wrap around it. If the organization doesn't already have some sort of framework or language around how they go about, you think like escalating issues and how promises and accountability and those kind of things. I like to introduce that and like to begin to build that, because often it's not there. Yeah. So giving them a voice is probably the other thing. I mean, it is so common for those people, whether they're individual contributors or they're in a specialty, they're the network infrastructure, software dev, support desk, whatever they are, it is so common that the hands go up and they say, they don't listen to me, or they throw things at me and expect me just to, deliver. They don't understand the complexity. So giving voice and making sure that the legitimate conversations are happening and things are welcome to be escalated, I think is a big part of building trust in that relationship.
Yeah, for sure. If you worked at Centerstone, right, you're around mental health, right? Listening, feeling heard, as maybe corny as that sounds, is maybe this, the not so secret to, to building relationships, right? Making sure that people can feel heard changes the game.
Absolutely. But it's sort of two ways. One is, if the organization is really clear on what their mission is, what they're about and what they're doing, it is super important that each person, even the person answering the phone on the help desk, understands how they are attached to that mission. And there at Centerstone, it was delivering care that changes people's lives. Okay. And so every one of our IT folks had a story that they could tell, that they say, I understand how I am part of delivering care that changes people's lives. Yeah. They knew it, whether I'm answering the phone, making sure a therapist doesn't get disrupted, making sure one of those case managers out in the field, their stuff works. I mean, they all attach themselves to that. And that's a big part of building that culture and that trust, because we always go back to that. It's the north that people connect to.
Yeah, I mean, that's your purpose, right? That's your
lot.
why, right? And everybody's got to have it, right? And every business that's doing something that they're getting paid for, it matters, right? If it didn't,
Yes.
people wouldn't do it. They wouldn't exist. I mean, we do, IT services, which can be as mundane as, as it gets, right? Just making
Right.
sure that, but if the network doesn't work, I can tell you right
Right.
now, the whole place is in chaos, right? I mean, that's,
Yes.
and our guys, we try to make sure our folks understand, like, this stuff is critical. Just because, I mean, if we do it well, no one will notice. That's one of the hard things about the business we're in. But we still got to do it well, even though no one, you're not necessarily going to get, high fives every day. Like, my computer worked. People expect it to work, but it doesn't just work. Like, somebody has to help make sure that happens.
Exactly. And they got to care
to your
about
point, connecting that to the bigger picture, and that's your, I think, to your point, getting into the tactical, that can get lost a lot of times. So I'm guessing part of the role of the fractional is to reinforce that connection.
Yeah. And understanding where the business wants to go, understanding what their business strategy is or what their goals are or how are that, and then connecting that to the technology strategy, developing the technology strategy, declaring a version of the future to the technology folks that's aligned with that business strategy, and them agreeing and say, yeah, that's the future I want to be part of. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And
so then matching the tactical stuff it's not easy, but it's a lot easier if you've got that story to work with, right?
Exactly.
It helps you make decisions.
So much. Yeah. So much.
So let's speaking of tactical, what is it? How do you structure engagements? What does that normally look like? And how does, what are there additional resources that you usually want to bring along, or that that often come along with an engagement?
Sure. Typically it's been a particular area that we've needed that the pain is being felt in. Okay. There are times, when there's an operational area and, they need some technology assistance as well. Or there's a technology arrangement. They need a COO kind of engagement. But typically it's been pretty singularly focused. The way our desire is usually a flat, fixed monthly retainer, because and the agreement that we usually have with the organization is, based on what you said, the scope that we've set, here's what we think, and we're going to set this. And I promise you, if it feels like that this is pulling me more than what we thought, then we'll have a conversation. And you do the same. If you don't feel like you're getting what that value is, and how we position that is, you've got in your mind what it's going to take to bring in a full-time, let's just say a CIO, okay, or COO. You know what that is. We've already agreed that we're having this conversation because you feel like, well, it's not really full-time yet, okay? So we're coming in less than a full-time. You got an experienced person, and we're assuming this is a 6 to 18, might be a 36 month, but probably 6 to 18 months is probably going to get us where you want to be. Right. So it's a fixed fee. You don't have to worry about picking up the phone and calling Wayne and how much that's going to cost you. Right. It's just, this is it, and I'm owning what we've agreed that you want me to own.
So the economics then are fairly clear, right? You've sort of back into,
right.
Well, just to be blunt, right? If I needed a full-time COO and that's $250,000, and I think I need you half-time, well, I don't have to be a mathematician to figure that out, right?
right.
You can sort of get there fairly quick, right?
Right.
Makes sense.
That's the way it works. Yeah. And hopefully it's going to be a quicker ramp up. Okay. It's going to be a different perspective, because, I've been in a few companies, and I've seen a few, and so have you. And so I'm coming in and knowing what I've experienced, but also knowing what's going on in the market.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And just I mentioned additional resources. I was thinking, I want to frame that question in my mind. I was thinking, like, do you usually see situations where people need X kinds of assistance beyond the fractional leadership? That's not really a good question. More curious about thinking about the since we're talking about technology has such an ecosystem around it of internal resources and external pieces that are part. It doesn't matter if it's a big company or a small company, right? The vendor the richness of vendors is for IT or for technology probably only matched by, like, if you're I guess a large retailer and you've got lots of vendors that provide the stuff you sell. Like there's a lot going on there. So do you find yourself getting engaged in that, or do you try to stay away from that because that can pull you into the weeds?
So if I understand your question, I think one of the things we bring, I would expect to every one of my engagements, I'm owning and managing that variety of vendor relationships.
That's what I'm asking, because that's such a critical part of being successful, right? And oftentimes that can, there can be legacy relationships, there can be overlaps, there can be duplication, there can be poor performers. There's, I would say a new set of eyes on that piece of the puzzle is important.
Right. And I would say so. It's usually, how do we get the most out of our vendors? How do we have good relationships with our vendors? How are we managing those contract relationships over time? How are we flexing to what's going on in the ecosystem, in the space? And I think I would say today, just sort of to pick on, Plow's world,
Please
what
do.
is the managed
it's easily picked upon.
Yeah, what managed service provider delivery, man, is going through some significant morphing. Where does the security component fit? Where does the infrastructure component fit? That needs a level of conversation and expertise and time that a CFO, CEO, or COO really should not be spending their time on. I mean, they need to outsource that. Now, the thing is, it's going to be really difficult to do that with one vendor. It really is. Now, Plow's the most awesome vendor, and they could do it all. But
well, of course, no, we can't do it. We think we're good because we can't do it all, right?
Because
the ones that tell you they can do it
yeah.
all, you should probably run the other way, right? That's the scary part,
so
because it's too big.
Yeah, then it requires this blend. It requires this blend and someone who understands the nuances of what's happening in the market. That's a specialty that somebody needs to come in and help manage that, because it's really critical to the strategy, being aligned, technology strategy, being aligned with the business strategy.
Yeah. And then, of course, the risk there's this significant risk management piece that's part of that, that oftentimes gets assumed away or baked into we've got cybersecurity insurance, or, whatever, you know what I mean? That I'll call them rationalizations. I was going to say excuses, but they're mostly just rationalizations for not having to deal with something that a lot of times people don't know much about, or that are scary, or that they know is probably going to be expensive. Right? It's amazing how you'll avoid that if you can.
Asking a leader that question, just saying, how do you feel about your security posture? If they have confidence, that's great.
Yeah.
If they don't understand why it's a posture and not a maturity process,
right,
that's an indication that you need to get confident in that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, then you that would go on your list for sure as part of a job. No, maybe not job one, but close to it. One of the top three.
Right.
No question. Okay, well, we'll kind of close out here with just a couple of wrap ups, a little more sort of forward thinking, I guess.
Sure.
When you talk to clients and they're thinking about making this decision for fractional leadership, or trying to, thinking about their match between sort of the business strategy and where they're going. And we're going to focus, let's focus specifically on technology. So fractional CIO kinds of stuff.
Sure.
And they're thinking about that decision. What are they worrying about the most that you get the sense of? This would be more on the front end, right, before you're engaged. What do you get the sense that they're worrying about what they might be getting? And are they worrying about the right things?
They usually, they're experiencing some, not to be trite, pain points. Okay. And those pain points are symptoms. And so it usually leads them to say, which component isn't quite right? Is it my technology? Is it my people?
Right.
Is it my process? Not to be,
right. The need is almost a sign of a failure or a miss to a certain degree, maybe.
Yeah. And it's, this didn't go well. We didn't finish that, or we've got this in front of us and we don't have confidence in our team that we've got all the skill sets to be successful, or man, we know we need to go buy a new one of those and we need somebody to help us evaluate what the opportunities are. All of that could be sort of whatever that pain is and uncertainty is, why they're coming to us.
Right. And do you think those are the right things to worry about? Are there other things they should be considering in this sort of calculus?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's almost always a real root cause.
Right.
Almost always a real root cause. And it's just getting to that. It really is getting to that. And a consultant, well, I'll tell you this. So I didn't answer the question of, well, when has it not gone well? I would say early on, we did a handful of assessments, and somebody would say, we go in and say, hey, we need an assessment to tell me where we are. Here are the things we think are broken. And as part of that, we'd usually do a roadmap. And so that would be a fixed 30, 45 days, whatever that was. We do an assessment, we'd hand them a roadmap. We delivered what we delivered with the idea that we were here to sort of execute on that roadmap with them. And more often than not, they choose not to do it. They'd say, we got it. This is good.
Right.
And as I followed up, it's pretty observable that they didn't really execute on the roadmap.
Right.
And so I think that's when it's not gone well. Because it's really difficult to textbook this stuff. Because what you can learn to the point about what the pain points are and what do you learn at first, it's all of the decisions about how you walk the journey when you encounter the reality of what is causing it.
Right. Yeah, it's a doing exercise, not a planning exercise, right? In a lot of ways. The planning is important, but it's the doing which gets you there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense. So I always like to wrap up this question just because it gives me, mainly because I like the answers I get, kind of fun to hear what people say. But as you look ahead and you think about the next 2-3 years, what excites you most about kind of where you are and the business you're in and the things you guys are up to?
What we are is a less traditional employment engagement. That's really what we are. I think the beauty of what the pandemic disrupted was a lot of traditional thinking. Minds are being opened about different ways to engage talent and to do it in a trustworthy way. And so I think I'm excited about the opportunity of companies really thinking creatively about how they succeed outside of every single relationship being a traditional salaried full-time relationship. I think that's growing. And the identification of technology being one of those where, we need some specialty there. And we need to find a really creative way to solve our specialty leadership need. I think that's what I'm excited about. I think right now, I don't want to say that AI excites me, okay? But the way it's going to force us to think differently about what work is kind of excites me.
Right.
We're gonna think really differently about what it means, what work means, because it's bigger. It's like electricity. It's like AI will become like electricity. It's a thing we're going to use. It's going to be infused in so much of the things we use.
Yeah, it's an enabling thing that changes a lot of the way we do stuff, right? And I always think of it as a leverage play. If we, the promise of AI to me is it has so much leverage capability, right? For us to be able to do things that we couldn't do before, either easily. I think it'll start with it'll start by taking easy stuff off the table, right? But over time, if the promise is what I think it is, and you don't have to be that creative to sort of project out. You can see it becoming an amplifier for your own capabilities and your own thinking, right? And your collective thinking as well, right? Because we've all been part of situations where, me sitting in this office thinking about stuff, maybe there's some good stuff that comes out of that, but there's also the possibility of me engaging with others and the collective mind meld generating something better than just I could come up with on my own. If that were the case, we wouldn't have companies. That's what companies get together for, right? There's a couple of reasons. Lower transaction costs, that's the old business school answer, right? To do things collectively, but also 1 + 1 is oftentimes more than 2, right? And I think AI can make that maybe 2.5 or 3 once we figure out how to engage it. I agree with you on that. And I don't know if that's what you were trying to say, but for me, that's the way I think about it in the context of sort of work, the way you phrased it. The flip side, you think about this short-term period, so not too long, 2-3 years. What scares you? What concerns you as you look ahead?
Well, really, gosh, this is almost trite again. It's the cyber threat. There are so many companies that don't have baseline controls in place, and it's just going to be so disruptive, and it's going to hurt some people and some good businesses in ways that just shouldn't. And that's it. It kind of scares me of the people in the businesses that are going to get hurt in preventable ways. Yeah.
And I mean, you're no different than me. You've already seen it. You've already seen instances of that, right? Where, some businesses don't make it, or the ones that do spend, a significant amount of time trying to recover to just get back to where they were before, right? And with that it's hard enough to, operate day to day in a competitive market, much less to have to take, 2, 3, 4 steps back and then try to get back into the game. That's a real challenge.
Right.
So,
right.
All right, last question before I move to a personal question.
Mm-hmm.
The name Work Heartily. Give us the story on the name.
Yeah. So it is from Ephesians 3:23. It is work heartily. It is to work heartily as unto the Lord, with heart. And Jonathan and I, we resonate in this idea that we want to leave things better than we found them, leaving lasting value in the work that we do. We're not there to extract. We're there to leave something better than we found it. I mean, I'm a little older in my career, I still work because I want to work. I mean, I need to pay enough to make a living, but I want to, and I tell you what, I want to do every single engagement conversation I have, unfortunately, and I can't,
Right.
Anytime somebody tells me the story of their business and what their pain points are, I'm like, oh yeah, let's get started. Let's do it. So I think my heart's in it from that standpoint. I love working with people. I love helping people. Again, it's what I said. My career started when I realized, wow, when technology can lift things off of people, it's awesome.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So I always like to wrap up with something personal. Not that what you just gave me was pretty personal, but this is non-work. Maybe that's the better way of describing it as opposed to personal. I'm going to ask you to share something you've watched or read lately that you think others ought to check out.
Oh my gosh. I love the twist of that. What I watched that I loved, I watched the Silo series, and I was really surprised how that continued to sort of resonate. I began to think and chew on that.
You're the second person who's recommended that recently.
Yeah.
So that's had an impact on some folks.
Yeah. Secondly, I finished reading, this is a little twist here, the Wingfeather Saga.
Okay.
Written by a guy named Andrew Peterson. It's a 4-book children's book. They're actually doing an animated series. They've done a season 2. I can't wait to read this with my grandkids. It is about courage and adventure and sort of encountering hard things. But it's this character building. It's so good.
I'll have to check it out. I've been reading. I went back and have been reading the Percy Jackson series just because my son liked them, and I didn't read them, and I love Greek and kind of Greek mythology, and so it's been fun. They're obviously fast reads, but good stories, good character development, and to your point, there's a lot of sort of moral stuff baked in there about what it means to be a good friend and courage and well done stories. It's like it's like reading the Harry Potter series. Good children's literature isn't really children's literature at the end of the day, right? It's just a little more accessible. Go back go all the way back to the Narnia series or any of the great children's works across the ages. So, well, thanks for sharing that. So, I'm going to check that out because I wasn't familiar with it. So I'm going to give it a look. The Wingfeather series, correct?
It's a Wingfeather Saga.
All right, Wayne, we'll wrap right there and let you get back to work. Thank you very much for being on Cut the Shit. We really appreciate it.
This is a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for doing this podcast too. I'm loving listening to it.
Great. Thanks a lot.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel. at Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.